taking Paige. Next question.
Here is Clark off the screen, launches, and drops a triple. But these Mercury gold medalists.
At just 22 years old, Caitlin Clark has redefined the landscape of women's basketball. She's not just a player, she's a phenomenon, a force of nature that has taken the WNBA by storm and left an indelible mark on the sport. From her record-breaking college career to her explosive entrance into the WNBA, Clark has shattered expectations and set new standards. But with her meteoric rise has come a wave of hostility, envy, and outright sabotage that threatens to undermine everything she's accomplished. This is the story of how Caitlin Clark, the most monumental figure in the history of the WNBA, found herself at the center of a battle that could change the league forever. Caitlin Clark's journey to the top has been nothing short of extraordinary. During her college career, she broke record after record, becoming the all-time leading scorer in both men's and women's basketball, a feat that cemented her status as one of the greatest to ever play the game. As fans flocked to see her play, filling stadiums across the country, it became clear that Clark was more than just a great player. She was a movement, a revolution in the making. But as her star rose, so did the resentment from those who felt threatened by her success. In an era where women's basketball has often struggled for recognition, Caitlin Clark has single-handedly changed the game. She's filling stadiums, drawing in fans who travel hours just to witness her magic on the court. She's become the face of the WNBA, a player whose impact on the sport is undeniable. But with that fame and success has come a darker side, a wave of jealousy and resentment that has turned Clark's experience in the WNBA into a gauntlet of hostility. One of the most troubling aspects of this hostility has come from within the ranks of the WNBA's own legends. Diana Taurasi, often hailed as the greatest of all-time GOAT in women's basketball, has not only failed to embrace Clark's rise but has actively sought to undermine it. In a series of public statements and actions, Taurasi has made it clear that she sees Clark as a threat, not just to her legacy but to her place in the sport's hierarchy. This tension between the old guard and the new has created a rift in the WNBA, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the league's future. Caitlin Clark grew up idolizing Diana Taurasi. She watched her play, studied her moves, and dreamed of one day following in her footsteps. But when Clark was drafted into the WNBA as the consensus #1 overall pick, the reception she received from her idol was anything but warm. Taurasi never reached out to offer words of encouragement or advice. Instead, she went on live television and downplayed Clark's abilities, making it clear that she didn't see Clark as worthy of the hype surrounding her. When asked if she would have chosen Clark as the #1 pick, Taurasi didn't hesitate. "I'm taking Paige," she said, referring to Paige Buckers, another standout player. Absolutely, for Clark, who had looked up to Taurasi her entire life, this was a devastating blow. But the snub was just the beginning of what would become a full-scale campaign to diminish Clark's accomplishments and keep her from overshadowing the established stars of the league. On June 30th, 2024, Caitlin Clark and Diana Taurasi were set to face off in one of the most highly anticipated games in WNBA history. The stage was set at the Footprint Center in Phoenix, where 177,000 fans had packed the arena, despite blistering temperatures that soared above 110 degrees. The game promised to be a clash of titans, a showdown between the old guard and the new, between the past and the future of women's basketball. For Taurasi, this was more than just another game. It was an opportunity to reassert her dominance in a league that was increasingly being reshaped by younger, more dynamic players like Clark. The significance of the game wasn't lost on Taurasi, who understood that history was unfolding in real time. Front row tickets were selling for $2,000 each, an astronomical sum that reflected the public's insatiable appetite for what many believed would be a defining moment in the sport. As the game began, Taurasi was in complete control. She scored effortlessly, racking up points and assists with ease. For a moment, it seemed like she was still the queen of the court, unchallenged and unshakable. But as the game wore on, the tide began to turn. Caitlin Clark, who had been relatively quiet in the opening minutes, started to find her rhythm. And when she did, the game and the entire narrative surrounding it began to change. The first real turning point came when Clark, with her signature deep-range shooting, sank a three-pointer from the logo, sending the crowd into a frenzy. Taurasi, who had been cruising up until that point, suddenly found herself on the back foot. The game was slipping away from her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the first quarter drew to a close, Taurasi made a desperate attempt to respond, but her shots didn't land, and her influence on the game began to wane. The heat inside the arena was becoming unbearable, not just from the soaring temperatures but from the pressure that Clark was applying on the court. The momentum had shifted, and it was clear that this was no longer Taurasi's game, it was Clark's. But the real drama was yet to come. Midway through the second quarter, Clark pulled off one of the most jaw-dropping moves of her career. In a one-on-one situation, she completely broke the ankles of Taurasi's teammate, Rebecca Allen, sending her crashing to the floor. The crowd erupted as Clark coolly drained the shot, and the look of shock on Taurasi's face said it all. The unthinkable had happened. Caitlin Clark had outplayed the GOAT on her home court, in front of the largest crowd the WNBA had seen since 1997. From that moment on, it was clear that the torch had been passed, whether Taurasi wanted to admit it or not. The rest of the game was a masterclass from Clark, who led the Indiana Fever on a comeback that saw them erase a 15-point deficit and take the lead. Every time Taurasi tried to rally her team, Clark was there to shut her down, whether it was with a clutch three-pointer or a perfectly timed steal. Taurasi, who had talked so much about Clark's supposed shortcomings, now found herself on the receiving end of a basketball lesson from the very player she had dismissed. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that Taurasi, despite her reputation as the GOAT, shied away from directly challenging Clark throughout the game. Time and again, when she had the opportunity to defend Clark, she passed the assignment to a teammate, avoiding the head-to-head battle that everyone had come to see. By the end of the game, the outcome was clear. Caitlin Clark had not only outplayed Diana Taurasi, but she had also exposed the fragility of her legacy. Taurasi's Phoenix Mercury had been defeated by the Indiana Fever, a team that hadn't beaten a top-ranked opponent all season. And at the center of that defeat was Taurasi herself, who had failed to deliver in the moments that mattered most. After the game, Taurasi was forced to confront the reality of what had just happened. In front of 177,000 fans and millions more watching on television, she had been outplayed, outclassed, and ultimately dethroned by a player who was supposed to be her successor, not her rival. In a rare moment of humility, Taurasi finally acknowledged Clark's greatness, saying, "What Caitlin's been able to do in her short career so far is nothing short of remarkable, but the damage had already been done." For Caitlin Clark, the victory was sweet, but it was also bittersweet. She had proven herself on the biggest stage, but the path to that victory had been fraught with challenges that went beyond the game itself. From the moment she entered the WNBA, Clark had faced resistance, not just from opponents on the court, but from the league itself. The constant scrutiny, the questionable calls from referees, the subtle and not so subtle digs from established players, it all pointed to a concerted effort to keep her from rising too fast, too soon. The controversy didn't end with the game. In the days that followed, social media lit up with discussions about the officiating, with many fans and commentators accusing the referees of bias against Clark. One particularly egregious call, an offensive foul against Clark that clearly should have been a defensive foul, became a focal point for those who believed that the WNBA was actively working against her. The narrative was clear: Caitlin Clark was being targeted, and it wasn't just about basketball. But for all the negativity, there was also a groundswell of support for Clark. Fans rallied around her, praising her resilience, her skill, and her refusal to back down in the face of adversity. The game against Taurasi became a defining moment, not just for Clark's career, but for the WNBA as a whole. It was a moment that forced the league to reckon with its treatment of its rising stars and to confront the possibility that its old guard was no longer the future of the sport. Caitlin Clark's story is one of triumph. But it's also a story of conflict within the WNBA, conflict between the generations, and conflict over what the future of women's basketball should look like. As Clark continues to blaze her trail, the league will have to decide whether to support her or to continue fighting against the tide of change that she represents. The stakes couldn't be higher. Caitlin Clark is more than just a player, she's a symbol of everything the WNBA could become if it embraces the new era she embodies. But if the league continues to resist, to protect its established stars at the expense of its future, it risks alienating the very fans it needs to grow and thrive. As the dust settles from the epic showdown between Caitlin Clark and Diana Taurasi, one thing is clear: the WNBA is at a crossroads. The choices it makes in the coming months and years will determine not just the fate of individual players, but the fate of the league itself. Will it be a league that celebrates and supports its rising stars, or one that clings to the past and resists the future? The world is watching, and the clock is ticking. Caitlin Clark has proven that she is here to stay, that she has the talent, the determination, and the resilience to overcome whatever obstacles are thrown in her path. But whether the WNBA is ready to embrace her and the change she represents remains to be seen. The battle for the future of women's basketball has only just begun, and Caitlin Clark is leading the charge. The question now is, who will stand with her?